Hello, hey, hello, and welcome. The main part of this afternoon will be in English, so I will start in English. Welcome to Nora, welcome to tonight's lecture and conversation under the headline Palestine as Litmus Test for Human Rights, Solidarity and Ethical Responsibility. Tonight we have two amazing guests with us, Omar Barghouti, who is here visiting Malmö. He is the co-founder of the BDS movement for Palestinian rights. And he is also the recipient of the 2017 Gandhi Peace Award. He is going to hold this first part of the evening is a lecture that Omar will give. The lecture will explore Palestine as a key measure of global human rights and focusing on ethical responsibilities of individuals and movements advocating for justice. We will also talk a bit about municipal, the possibility of maybe working towards boycott on a municipal level and get into that more. Also in the discussion part that will follow. In this discussion, I will also welcome Balsam Karam up to the stage. Balsam is an acclaimed author and also a librarian, and also the program director of the MA in Literary Composition on the University of Gothenburg. So I will invite Balsam to join Omar, and there will be a discussion for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then the last portion of the talk, for the evening, maybe 30 minutes, will be for audience questions. So please make some notes or think about what you want to ask. And I think a lot of people will want to ask our dear guests a lot of things tonight. Without further ado, or like I said before, maybe not all of you were here, but for those of you who are fasting today breaks at 5:45. I will give a heads up, and feel free to snack whenever. I mean, all of you who are not fasting, feel free to snack. I will give you a heads up. We will begin with Omar's lecture now. I will give you the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks all for coming today. US President Trump's new plan for forcibly displacing over 2 million Palestinians from Gaza to create a Riviera is not new and not his. Moreover, it's a deliberate distraction from the genocide and the absolute need for accountability. Ethnically cleansing Gaza is Israel's old plan that Trump is now duly and obsessively trying to market. It is anything but new, as forced displacement and the physical erasure of the indigenous people of Palestine is as old as Zionist settler colonialism in Palestine. Let's remember that days into the start of Israel's genocide in October 2023, a leaked Israeli Ministry of Intelligence document revealed a plan for ethnically cleansing Palestinians from Gaza to Sinai in Egypt at the end of the war, as they called it. Not to be outdone and to make forced displacement sound normal in comparison, on 5 November 2023, Israel's Minister of Heritage from the Jewish Power Party, Amichai Eliyahu, suggested dropping a nuclear bomb on the Gaza ghetto. Israel's ultimate goal in its ongoing genocide, and it is ongoing, and I'll get to that, in Gaza, remains to ethnically cleanse our people again in a 21st century Nakba of dispossession, demolition, displacement, and utter dehumanization. Still, this Netanyahu-Trump plan is beyond depraved. It's sheer evil. Planning to forcibly displace Palestinian survivors of the US-Israeli genocide against Palestinians in the illegally occupied Gaza constitutes not just a war crime, but a continuation of the genocide, as a leading Palestinian human rights organization in Gaza puts it. It's a desperate attempt to normalize Israel's live-streamed genocide and to achieve, through US imperialist bullying, what Israel's military prowess has utterly failed to accomplish after 15 or 16 months of genocide, as an Israeli military investigation now reveals. Indeed, only 4% of Jewish Israelis believe that Israel's goals were fully achieved in Gaza, according to a recent poll. As early as December 2023, in fact, the US defense establishment warned Israel of such a strategic defeat. Like all settler colonies, Israel has long desired to exterminate the indigenous people of Palestine if it could get away with it. For decades, it has committed what Israeli historian Ilan Pappé calls incremental genocide. A recent error by Israel's censors has accidentally revealed secret documents exposing Israeli First Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion's conscious decision to wipe out Palestinian villages, as he called it, during the 1948 Nakba, as a necessary condition to create what Israeli human rights group B'Tselem today calls, quote, a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, end of quote. In a particularly shocking testimony of an Israeli soldier reported in the now defunct Israeli paper Davar, he described what his fellow Israeli soldiers perpetrated in the Palestinian village of Al-Dawaima in 1948. He said, quote, to kill the children, they fractured their heads with sticks. The men and women of the villages were pushed into houses without food or water. Then the soldiers came to dynamite the houses. One commander ordered a soldier to bring 2 women into a house he was about to blow up. Another soldier prided himself upon having raped an Arab woman before shooting her to death. Another Arab woman with her newborn baby was made to clean the place for a couple of days, and then they shot her and the baby. Educated and well-mannered commanders, he said, who were considered good guys, became base murderers, and this not in the storm of battle, but as a method of expulsion and extermination. He said, the fewer the Arabs who remain, the better, end of quote. This was 1948. Fast forward to 2008, when an Israeli Labour Party leader, the left of center, supposedly, threatened Palestinians with a bigger Holocaust if resistance groups did not stop their armed retaliation to Israel's siege and violent attacks on Gaza. So when Israeli leaders drool over ethnically cleansing Gaza to re-establish their colonial settlements there, they're being honest representatives of the founding principles of Zionism and Zionist settler colonialism. Those principles are in full display in Israel's intensifying, gradual ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. Israeli War Minister Israel Katz has referred to the military attacks happening now in the north of the West Bank, on Jenin in particular, for example, as, quote, the first lesson from the method of repeated raids in Gaza, end of quote. Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich, a self-declared fascist homophobe, has incited fanatic colonial violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, saying, quote, Nablus and Jenin need to look like Jabalia, end of quote. Jabalia is the refugee camp in Gaza that they've decimated. So many Israeli military operations and systems have iron in their names, if you've noticed. Israel's name, for example, for its murderous attack in the north of the West Bank is called Iron Wall. This particular term refers to a booklet by the same name, published in 1923 by Jabotinsky, a key Zionist leader, who honestly wrote in that book, quote, Zionist colonization, you can see how honest he is, he called it by name. Zionist colonization must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population, which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach. End of quote. Jabotinsky's iron wall, a pillar of Zionist settler colonialism in Palestine, has always included brute colonization of the land and, very importantly, a simultaneous attempted colonization of the minds of the indigenous Palestinians with dread, fear, and despair. The erasure of the natives demands enacting not just genocide, but also epistemicide, the killing of knowledge, native knowledge and knowledge about natives. The McCarthyite and deeply racist Western repression against the advocacy of Palestinian humanity and Palestinian rights, as we've seen in some Swedish universities, must be seen as part of this epistemicide, erasing knowledge of Palestinians. The deep complicity of the colonial West and the genealogy of Israeli War Minister Yoav Gallant's depiction and treatment of Palestinians in Gaza as human animals can be traced to the centuries-old history of European and Euro-American dehumanization and colonial subjugation, even extermination, of non-European nations. The Western hegemonic establishment, including corporations, universities, the mainstream media, etc., is not only actively enabling Israel's genocide, in parallel, it is also desperately and harshly trying to silence advocates of Palestinian rights, to deprive us of our agency, of our ability to articulate, to resist, to stop the genocide. Still, the colonizer's will is always challenged by the will and agency of the colonized. Israel was forced, after all, to accept ceasefire terms that it had rejected for many months. The chief factor behind this must be the legendary sumud, resilience and resistance of the Palestinian people, supported by an exponentially growing global solidarity movement led by the BDS movement. While Palestinians have welcomed the ceasefire agreement with immense relief, we're keenly aware that it is only the necessary first step to end the genocide. Without massive pressure, this ceasefire may constitute a continuation of the genocide in a less visible form that Israel and the US hope will provoke less regional and global outrage, boycotts, and sanctions. This genocide, after all, has intentionally reduced the illegally occupied Gaza Strip into an unlivable territory to cause continued mass loss of Palestinian lives and spread of infectious diseases, as well as famine for years to come, while attempting to force as many Palestinians from Gaza as possible into exile. Despite the typical militaristic bravado, it is far from evident that the Israeli establishment wishes to resume its ruthless bombardment and massacres in Gaza. Israel's economy is experiencing what 130 of its top economists describe as a spiral of collapse, with an almost unprecedented brain drain, a nose-diving tech industry, and a credit rating that is near junk levels, according to Moody's. Increasingly seen by investors as what the BDS movement calls a shutdown nation, Israel has ranked dead last among 50 countries in the recently released Nations Brand Index. The chairman of the Israel Export Institute admits, quote, BDS and boycotts have changed Israel's global trade landscape, end of quote. As evidenced by repeated UN votes, The overwhelming majority of nations today see Israel as a rogue state that has not only exterminated tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, and in a few weeks killed thousands in Lebanon and occupied large swaths of Syria and is destroying refugee camps in the West Bank, but it simultaneously is bulldozing the very tenets of international law, the foundations of international law. Israel's prime minister is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity, including extermination. The International Court of Justice in January 2024 decided that Israel is plausibly committing genocide, and in July 2024 ruled that Israel's occupation is entirely illegal and that it's committing apartheid. Israel's total criminality and impunity are beginning to be met with relentless efforts to enforce accountability at all levels. As early as October 2023, days into Israel's genocidal attack in Gaza, Colombian President Gustavo Petro warned of, quote, the unprecedented rise of fascism and therefore to the death of democracy and freedom. He said, Gaza is just the first experiment in considering us all disposable, end of quote. And he was referring mainly to the global south, but also racialized communities in the global north. Giving us a taste of what such a dystopian future may look like, earlier in 2024, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, quote, if you're not at the table in the international system, you're going to be on the menu, end of quote. Trump's menu, of course, is quite elaborate. Canada, Panama, Greenland, Gaza, God knows who else. Clearly, not only Israel is on trial at the International Court of Justice, the entire Western-dominated international legal system is also on trial. This all explains Israel's heightened vulnerability to BDS strategies and tactics worldwide. In the face of all of Israel's ongoing carnage, especially in Gaza, and to exercise our moral agency, we in the BDS movement have learned to persistently channel our grief and our rage into a principled and strategic struggle to end the genocide and to dismantle its underlying regime of settler colonialism and apartheid and hold the perpetrators and their accomplices, including in this country, to account, holding them accountable. Palestinians have no illusions, though, that justice will shine on us from the ICJ or the UN. We have international law and the ethical high ground on our side as an indigenous people resisting a depraved genocidal system of oppression to achieve our rights. Ethics and the law are necessary in our and any other liberation struggle, but they are never sufficient. To resist and abolish a system of oppression, the oppressed invariably need power as well. People power, effective solidarity power, grassroots power, intersectional coalition power, media power, cultural power, peaceful disruption power, strategic litigation power, and so on. When the Palestinian consensus calls for BDS, we are not begging for charity. We're calling for meaningful solidarity. And before both, we are demanding an end to complicity. We're demanding of everyone to do no harm. Unspeakable criminality and shameless complicity must be met with inexorable accountability. As the struggle that abolished apartheid in South Africa has shown, ending state, corporate, and institutional complicity in Israel's regime of oppression, especially through the non-violent tactics of BDS, is the most effective form of solidarity. The BDS movement is led by the largest coalition in Palestinian civil society. Inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle and the US civil rights movement, it is rooted in a century of Palestinian popular resistance. It aims at ending Israel's regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid, and upholding, and that's the most important part, upholding the right of Palestinian refugees to return and receive reparations. Anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the BDS movement categorically opposes all forms of racism: anti-Palestinian racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny, and so on and so forth, anti-Black racism, and so on. BDS targets complicity, not identity. A 2022 poll, so not too long ago, shows that 16% of all Jewish Americans support BDS, with the percentage rising sharply for those under the age of 40. They understand that there's nothing Jewish about Israel's siege, ethnic cleansing, massacres, land theft, occupation, apartheid, or genocide. And therefore, there's nothing anti-Jewish in supporting BDS to end these crimes and systems of injustice. So what is the BDS movement calling for right now as a matter of priority? 6 points, and I'll reach the end. 1, challenging and peacefully disrupting business as usual in complicit states, corporations, and institutions. 2, escalating strategic boycotts and divestments from companies that are complicit in Israeli apartheid, including banks, military companies, dual-use companies like you have here in Malmö, as well as campaigns targeting companies implicated in the genocide. 3, convincing businesses, cultural centers, academic organizations, associations, unions to declare themselves apartheid-free zones. 4, and this is very important for the point about municipalities that was mentioned in the introduction, organizing strategic intersectional campaigns to pressure investment funds, pension funds, and institutions like city councils, universities, churches, cultural institutions, theaters, and so on, to adopt what we call an ethical procurement policy and ethical investment policy that exclude companies implicated in grave human rights violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, anywhere. So not specific to any country or any specific conflict. These guidelines can then be applied to divest from Israel bonds, from companies involved in Israel's occupation, apartheid, and so on. I would love to see the face of someone in the Malmö City Council saying, I'm against adopting an ethical procurement policy. I mean, imagine how difficult it will be for them. I'm an unethical person and I'm opposed to this. Even if they are, they will not admit it. So let's push for this. 5, pressuring government to end its shameful complicity, starting with a comprehensive military embargo on Israel, which is a matter of duty, not discretion. It's a legal obligation under international law given the ICJ decisions. It's not voluntary and it's not charitable to impose a military embargo, as well as targeted financial, economic, academic, and diplomatic sanctions on Israel. 6, and last, supporting legal and human rights groups' initiatives for investigating and prosecuting Israelis and others who have been involved in international crimes against Palestinians. To defeat Trumpism, Israeli genocidal exceptionalism, and the rising wave of fascism here and worldwide, and to ensure that no weaker nation or racialized community is ever put on a colonial power's menu, broad tent, inclusive, anti-racist alliances are more important than ever. This is not just an ethically desired strategy to unite racial, climate, social, economic, gender justice movements to build a critical mass of people power. The current threat to humanity shows that the intersectional unity of those struggles has truly become an existential need. Egyptian and Greek mythologies mention the phoenix rising from the ashes. Well, Palestinians in Gaza have shown that this is not entirely a myth. With the shaky ceasefire barely holding hundreds of thousands of Palestinian genocide survivors emerged from the carnage of what Gaza became, whose civilization goes back 4,000 years, marching to the north of Gaza with hope, despite knowing that almost nothing is left of their homes, services, schools, hospitals, water supply, sewage, nothing is left. Everything has been wiped out by the Israeli genocide. The real aspiration for most of them are refugees, is to keep marching home to where their families had been ethnically cleansed during the 1948 Nakba. You can help them realize that goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanda. Thank you for your insights, this enormous clarity that you're giving us, and this inspiration that you're coming with us and bringing to us tonight. I would like to welcome also now Balsam Karam, please applaud for. I tried to prepare myself for this evening, talking with you two amazing activists and thinkers. And when I thought about this headline for tonight, how Palestine is the litmus test for human rights, I remembered this quote being like something that comes along a lot. Like I've heard this in circles concerning the legality, or like this idea of human rights, but also just like a litmus test for humanity itself, or for moral imperative. And from what I know and have been taught by activists such as Angela Davis, this comes from a quote by the late, great Afro-American poet June Jordan, who said that there are two issues of our time that she thinks amounts to a litmus test of morality. What we are prepared to do on behalf of the Palestinian people, and what we're prepared to do for gay and lesbian people. So I would like to also, beginning this conversation, read a poem by June Jordan, or an excerpt of a poem, because we're now also in the company of an author and an artist. This is the poem Apologies to All the People in Lebanon, dedicated to the 600,000 Palestinian men, women, and children who lived in Lebanon from 1948 until 1983. So this is written in the 80s. I didn't know, and nobody told me, and what could I do or say anyway? They said you shot the London ambassador, and when that wasn't true, they said, so what? They said you shelled their northern villages, and when UN forces reported that was not true, because your side of the ceasefire was holding since more than a year before, they said, so what? They said they wanted simply to carve a 25-mile buffer zone, and then they ravaged your water supplies, your electricity, your hospitals, your schools, your highways and byways, all the way north to Beirut, because they said this was their quest for peace. They blew up your homes and demolished the grocery stores and blocked the Red Cross and took away doctors to jail. And they cluster-bombed girls and boys whose bodies swelled purple and black into twice the original size and tore the buttocks from a 4-month-old baby. And then they said this was brilliant military accomplishment, and this was done, they said, in the name of self-defense. They said that is the noblest concept of mankind, isn't that obvious? They said something about never again, and then they made close to 1 million human beings homeless in less than 3 weeks, and they killed or maimed 40,000 of your men and your women and your children. But I didn't know, and nobody told me, and what could I do anyway? They said they were victims. They said you were Arabs. They called your apartments and gardens guerrilla strongholds. They called the screaming devastation that they created the rubble. And then they told you to leave, didn't they? I didn't know and nobody told me. And what could I do or say anyway? Yes, I did know it was the money that I earned as a poet that paid for the bombs and the planes and the tanks that they used to massacre your family. But I am not an evil person. The people of my country aren't so bad. You can expect but so much from those of us who have to pay taxes and watch American TV. You see my point. I'm sorry. I really am sorry. So with this poem, I would like to ask you, Balsam, maybe a first question about the role of the artist and the role of storytelling and poetry in the fight for a just world and for Palestine.
Yes. Do you hear me? Yes, you do. Thank you so much, Ustaz Omar, for the lecture, and thank you for having me, everybody here in Malmö. I think that Ustaz Omar actually was quite into this already. In a way, you already spoke about this, of course, in the sense that, I mean, first of all, you spoke about perhaps literature and when you spoke about the Iron Wall, the booklet. I mean, language in itself, as Toni Morrison has said, it's not depicting violence or the world. It actually is violence, and in a way, it is the world. Mm-hmm. So we deal with that as an author, for example. I deal with language all the time, and language is also something that is very common. We have to deal with that. I mean, on the packages and in the subway, wherever we go, there is something. I mean, in the ads and so on. Language is very, very common and denominator between us. In this sense, and also at times when we have seen that dehumanization of the Palestinians and, indigenous people everywhere, but I mean, the last 15 months, especially the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza, it's quite, for me as an author, it's very hard not to see how I am a part of that language, or how I have to simply not just, I cannot be neutral to that language, because there is no neutral point to that language. Either you're with it or you're against it, to use a very harsh term. And I believe that is the case with a lot of art. And of course, you can get into the fact, I mean, how do you do it practically then? Now, there is many ways of dealing with that, and perhaps we have time to do that later. I don't want to take up too much time, but for me, it's been very important both to analyze text simply, to just point out where a text becomes dehumanizing. What a strange word to say. Yes, it should be. And, to keep on doing that work, but also, of course, to do the opposite work of it, which is to all the time return to what should be, which is the humanization. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I am very thankful for what you have brought, so to say, as a writer, as a reader, like just what you have been sharing. I mean, I follow you on social media, but you have really been devoting those platforms of your life as an author, as an artist, to just analyzing headlines of Swedish media, like texts that are put out, everything from cultural articles to news articles, which is, I mean, referring to what you're saying, I think we're bombarded with this language all the time. And even though we're critical, and I think most of us, or all of us who sit here tonight are part of the movement for free Palestine in one way or another, just the constant bombardment of this language
that skew things. We need also the antidote, or like the people who can decipher these things, which is really important. And I also want to, because I think in your brilliant lecture you touch on the role of the international law, the international community, the ICJ, the UN, and how these institutions, we know that, like, Palestinians know that they're in the right here. It's very apparent, and these institutions are also now, I mean, I think the UN has declared many times that things that Israel has been doing has been illegal, but I think that what we've seen during the past 2 years is also even sterner, going even further in denouncing what is happening, but still the consequences are lacking. And me as an activist, or where I've come from, has also a very inherent sort of critique of these institutions of liberal democracy, or like human rights in a sense. And I think that, or I found a brilliant quote by Francesca Albanese, who I think a lot of you know, who is a human rights lawyer and the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine. She works for the UN, but she still said, this is from November last year, that the genocide now in Palestine is ongoing, and that is the consequence of the international community neglect to address the persistent colonial and imperial legacy that lies at the core of these institutions, and that they just cannot move away from that. And I'm thinking about these other institutions of liberal democracy, like, for example, just like universities or libraries. I mean, this way that you are, how, or like what you think about the likeness of these.
Yeah, I will speak a little bit, and I would really like to hear Ustad Omar also talk about what you think about these human rights institutions and, you know, the human or the international law. Because I have a few things to say about that too. But yeah, good. But I think as a university lecturer, first of all, I don't, like, one thing I don't do is I don't tell my boss I'm gonna come here. Right? Not because I just do whatever I want. And if my university, as a lecturer in this sense, and I'm also in many groups at my university, I'm also working at the arts department it was called HDK Valand, and we're many lecturers and personnel in a boycott group simply that has been active since, well, mostly active since the genocide in Gaza started. But and I'm just waiting for them to just say something so I can just hit them, because it's so true what we are saying. Like, we have, I mean, the Palestinians and this movement and the BDS have not only the moral right on their side and the international right on their side and the ethical right on their side. There's also, like, it just shows how the silence that they believe that they're just, we're just being ourselves. This silence is really complicit. And of course, there's many other ways in which, for example, the University of Gothenburg is complicit. But one of the problems that I have, found, because we had in Gothenburg, we had the longest standing, I think, campus encampments, in Europe at least. So they tore it down. It was also, that was the most stupid way, the way they tore it down, because then they had another party decided to have a manifestation for what do you call it? Yttrandefrihet.
Yeah, freedom of speech.
Thank you, freedom of speech. So because of that, they had to tear everything down. Now that was, of course, only a trick, but our principle always states something that is really, I think, very important for everybody here who are students and that we should be aware of. She says, if the government tells me that I will boycott, that I should boycott, Israeli universities. I will do it. And this is a major problem because universities are supposed to be free. Yeah. And of course, we can take a lot of other things, like the stance that they had for Ukraine. I mean, we're not going into that kind of, but of course we could. But this is also a very big problem here, since I believe that this is something that perhaps other universities can take on, to speak in this term, that there is, there's always a higher ground that needs to tell us something. And when the international law does, it still doesn't apply.
Do you have thoughts now?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. Well, first, we're aware of who wrote the basics of international law, colonial powers, clearly for their own purposes. So that's very obvious. However, we don't deal with international law as a given, as a dogma, as a box that you take or leave. As human rights activists, we take it and reinterpret it and push it and expand it to help our struggles for justice. We don't accept it as a given. We've done that over the last 20 years quite effectively. The way we dealt with apartheid, for example, and I've said this before, as a tool of settler colonialism, was something unheard of, and we had many problems with some international lawyers. Many of them happened to be very conservative, in the box. But we, on the ground, and with the help of other international lawyers that are more progressive, like Francesca Albanese and others, they helped push the interpretation of international law to help justice struggles. So that is one point. The other point is that who has the most interest in destroying the foundations of international law? The mighty, the big bullies, the Trumps and Netanyahus and Germans and British. I mean, those have much more interest than weaker groups and nations and racialized communities. We have nothing to resort to except this semblance of protection. But, as I said in my talk, it is never sufficient. It's power. It's all about power, because international law does not have a way to enforce itself. You need power to enforce it.
And I think it's been, just a comment on that, it's been so evident the way that who wrote, when we talk about that, like one of the things that's been ongoing during the genocide is, of course, when several Israeli ministers have said, among them Benjamin Netanyahu has said, well, nobody can tell us anything because the US dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, right? So, as if the US is the moral beacon. Exactly. And this is one of the problems, that the US has been seen as a moral beacon of something, which is extremely, absurd. We all know this. But as the anti-imperialist movement, in a way, was kind of, broken into pieces, after the Vietnam War, especially, because, and then it rose again, of course, in the beginning of the with the Seattle movements and so on. But it's still, nowadays, it's, the imperialist, to speak about that is in some circles a bit rare. But still, it's this, that the ones that are ruling the international law in a way, or implementing it, or, forcing not some implementations, are also the ones that nuked a country 2 times beforehand. And then before that, of course, the indigenous people everything that's been happening here is, of course, in a way, like they look at the US and then they do it.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's very apparent that the US, as part of the Security Council, can veto as long as they want anything. Because of the position of power that they have within the UN. And circling back to what you're saying, like these words and these laws and everything, they don't mean anything unless we can put power behind it. And the US can put a lot of economic and military power behind what they're doing. They can say, we will go to The Hague and forcefully remove people from the US or from Israel if they are indicted or if they are put up to trial. They have a law that says they will. And that is power. Building this power, as you were talking about. I think that the BDS movement is a genius movement, and as you're saying, and have made very clear in your talk that it is a movement that, I mean, it's for Palestine that we're building it in a sense now, but it is also the tool for building power for all movements of justice in a sense, and that's the way. It's a way of doing that. But then tying into what you're saying about intersectionality, how do we build intersectional movements? Is it a local thing? How do we think about this on a global scale? I would like to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Of course, intersectionality, as most of us would know, is a Black feminist concept developed by US Black feminists, and they've given us a huge contribution to our understanding. We've all practiced it somehow, but we didn't have the theorization until they contributed this concept to us. I think it is a must today, an existential need. It's not a luxury, it's not something cool, nice, yeah, it's progressive to have. It's absolutely necessary today. It was always important, but now it's absolutely existentially needed. This is because, I mean, in a nutshell, intersectionality means that every one of us is not just one identity. We have several identities intersecting. Class, gender, race, they all intersect. And because oppressions intersect, resistance to oppression must intersect, normally. So think of it in terms of our enemies are much more united. Look at the far right. In the US and Europe, forget the rest of the world, forget India, forget Argentina, just look at the West. How united, like never before. They repeat the same slogans, they're really united. Why can't the rest of us also unite? Not in a romantic way, yeah, we all love each other and hug. No. Forget that nonsense. It doesn't happen. It's about finding a common denominator where we can all live with it and work from it to resist collectively. We will not agree on everything. So Balsam and I may disagree on X, Y, but can we agree on 1, 2, 3, 4? That is a good basis for us to work together. And our disagreements, she can do her own thing on where we disagree, and I do my own thing. So we don't have to agree on everything. The maximalist approach to coalition building never works. It's not a leftist approach, it's an ultra-left approach. Either you're pure and you agree with my full agenda, or you're a sellout. You'll be left with your cult. The 6 people in the room that are your entire leadership and Politburo and membership. And you call yourself a party. That's not a party. That's a cult. So we cannot be purists in a sense, and we can't be pragmatic to the level where we sell our principles. I've given this example before. Some far-right groups usually are very pro-Israel, extremely pro. They love Israel. They hate the Jews, but they love Israel. This is the new formula. It's okay to hate the Jews as long as you love Israel. We'll give you like a stamp. You're approved. This is the formula. But some weird far-right group in Italy that does not like Israel for some strange reason wanted to join some Palestine solidarity mobilizations there. And the movement was very, very clear. No, you cannot join our movement. We don't work with fascists. Even if you're pro-Palestine, we don't work with fascists. So intersectionality has to be also an intersection between ethical principles and strategic effectiveness, what we call strategic radicalism. So you can be radical and principled, but also strategic, goal-oriented, effective. Otherwise, we don't change reality. So being revolutionary is not about raising a slogan and not doing anything with it, because it's not enactable. It's about raising a slogan that pushes us to do more, to change reality, to end oppression. So we can agree on a lot of things, what I called a broad tent approach to coalition building. We can establish such big coalitions and push one clear agenda against fascism, against racism and white supremacy, and for true democratic and human rights. In the details, we'll disagree, and that's perfectly fine. Controversy is okay. But let's agree on the broad principles, so we can push at every university, at every city council, in every cultural center. We can push demands like an ethical procurement policy. Why wouldn't we push all for an ethical procurement policy, for example?
I want us to talk about this at length, but first I want to apologize. I said that I would tell you when it was time to break the fast, and it happened about 14 minutes ago. So I'm very sorry, and that was my fault. But please, if you need to stand up and fix and take your things and do that, please do that, and we will move on. So, going back to the ethical procurement policy, which you talked about in your talk, and which is a very, it seems like a very interesting tool to work towards the municipalities, schools, churches, as you said. Please tell us more.
It's very simple, because some people might think it's in some academic concept that requires Einstein to understand. No, it's very simple. It basically says this city council will not have procurement contracts with any company involved in very serious violations of international law. And it has to be very serious, because if you just say violations of international law, that's 99.999% of companies. As I said yesterday, only Ben and Jerry's may pass. Everyone else is guilty. So that's not very strategic. Again, we have to be ethical but strategic. So it needs to be grave human rights violations, such as atrocity crimes, as defined by the UN. War crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and so on, which are plenty. I mean, there are many war crimes. So if a company is persistently involved in war crimes, why would the Malmö City Council contract it? What excuse can they give?
Yeah.
It'll be very difficult for them. And without specifying a country. So after this passes, the climate justice movement can come the next day and say, well, this and this and this companies are proven to be destroying the environment. We want the Malmö City Council to exclude them. And the Palestine solidarity groups can go and say, oh, Caterpillar, which you're including in your tenders, is involved in ta-ta-ta-ta, as proven by the Presbyterian Church USA and 10 years of research on Caterpillar, excluded from the framework contracts, and so on and so forth. So every justice movement can go with its own specific demands, but the principle has been accepted already. What can prevent us from all working together to get such policies adopted in every institution in Sweden? It is the easiest thing to do, because it is very difficult for the opposition to oppose it publicly. They will try their best secretly to oppose it, to lobby against it. But how can they publicly face up to this?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting thing to imagine, or like in the sense that we somehow sometimes see them also opposing it. But I wanted to ask you, because I think that in the BDS history there has been also, for example, if a company or like a municipality or one of these institutions, for example, have nowhere else to get a certain product or service. There is only one. There is a monopoly of a sort.
Yes.
Because I know that this is something that has happened also in the history of the BDS and working with Intel, for example.
Yes.
Do you mind telling us a little bit about this?
Yes. Well, there are two different things that you mentioned. First, the ethical principle of coercive relations. So if I have no choice for my medicine except from a company that is complicit, I have no choice but to buy it. It's medicine and it's necessary. I have to buy it. It's not like Coca-Cola. It's not necessary for your life. Even if the supermarket only has Coca-Cola, boycott the damn thing. It's bad for your health. I mean, you don't need it. But if there's a company that sells medicine, you obviously need it, and so on. So that if you have a choice, you have a moral responsibility to exclude companies that are unethical. If you don't have a choice, you don't have a moral responsibility to exclude them, such as people under systems of oppression. Many people come from Europe and they say, oh, we went to Nablus and Ramallah, and people still use Israeli salt. Yeah, there is no other salt. If you don't buy Israeli salt, you don't use salt in your life. So what do? But in Sweden, you don't have to buy Israeli salt. So this is the point. Yeah. Choices give you ethical responsibility to act. But the other thing about Intel is very interesting. Very quickly, there are 4 criteria for selecting a BDS target. First, level of complicity. The more complicit it is, the better target it makes. Second, intersectionality. A company involved in injustices against other communities, not just Palestinians, is a better target because it connects the struggles. Third, brand, media name. A big company name, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, is much more important, HP, much more important than an unknown company because it helps us reach millions and media and so on. And fourth criterion is potential for success. Can we win or can't we win? It's a strategic question. It's not an ethical question. With Intel, we have been trying to boycott. We had tried to boycott Intel for many, many, many years because Intel is extremely complicit. And it's complicit in many struggles. And it's a huge brand, so it fulfills the first three criteria. But the fourth, it does not. It doesn't check the box. It was a monopoly. You could not boycott Intel a few years ago. It was in every computer, every phone, and so on. But it lost its monopoly status. Now it's a very competitive market out there. And we loved that because then in the beginning of the genocide, in 2023, Intel announced in December, 2 months into the genocide, after more than 20,000 Palestinians had been massacred, they announced a $25 billion investment in Israel, 15 miles from Gaza. Just imagine how evil. But Intel was not like in the 1990s. It's no longer a monopoly, or the early 2000s. So we called for a boycott and divestment. But most importantly, we called on the shareholders of Intel to prevent this investment from happening because they're throwing away $25 billion into a conflict, war zone that it could blow up at any moment. So without taking any ethical stance, you wouldn't want your money to be in such a risky conflict area. And that worked like a charm, that tactic. The ethics and international law with investors is, a matter of opinion. But money is religion. There you don't joke. That's dogma. So they got Intel to cancel the project. And this is the biggest BDS victory ever. $25 billion project was canceled.
I have a question to both of you, I was thinking. Because I believe in a sense that the notion of boycott is not unknown, for example, for the Swedish people. I mean, we hear about it all the time. We heard about it very clearly when the war in Ukraine started, and we hear even more. I mean, we hear about it now towards the US even. So I was thinking, in the sense, of course, the question of Palestine and the hardships of boycott when it comes to the question of Palestine is also a question of racism in depth. But I mean, what do you think, Ustaz Omar, to address that simply? Why it's becoming such a... Yes, the hypocrisy, absolutely, but that in the depth of it, of course, is that, there is a racism simply. And the racism stems from the fact that this is a conflict that's been ongoing. It's always been like this, and the Arabs always do this, and who will ever save it, and what does it matter to me, and it's so far away, and they started it, and blah, blah, blah. It's like a whole cloud of arguments. But I was thinking about that because what you just said, of course, in the end was very important, that this is, also you have to be strategic. But I've struggled a lot with this, and perhaps in my own, and what we started with in my own way is, of course, to humanize, to keep on humanizing, this is, what are we talking about here? But what has been your experiences with that?
If I met, and I have met, a Western politician who tells me this, it's been going on, it's a century-old conflict and so on, I would tell them this is so 2 years ago. I mean, post-ICJ decisions, I don't care about your opinion. It's a matter of legal duty. Sweden is complicit in war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide because the Swedish state is allowing arms trade with Israel, buying and selling to Israel, sometimes dual-use items, sometimes weapons that are just weapons. Swedish universities are complicit, Swedish cultural institutions are complicit, and so on and so forth. It's a matter of legal obligation to end this complicity. and I don't care about your opinion. I mean, if I had time, and I don't, I might listen. But today I don't have time. This is a matter of legal obligation. You have to do it. If you do not do it, don't blame Trump. You're a mini Trump. You're Trump's puppet. And you'll always be a puppet. But you are doing a Trump. Trump is, you have to admire his honesty. An honest fascist who's saying, I couldn't care less about this international law. What does it mean anyway? I decide I want Greenland, I want to have it. That's exactly what Europe has done forever. 500 years of European colonialism, that's what Europe has done. This is a European, this is a very European culture about grab what you like in Africa, Asia, Latin America. That's what Europeans have done for 500 years. So that's what Trump is saying now openly. Let's not pretend that, we have international law and human rights, give me a break. It's the powerful that decide. I'm powerful, I will decide. So I think I would just remind them of the legal obligation, and if they don't fulfill their legal obligation, they are helping to destroy international law. And then if Russia decides to invade Sweden, they can't blame anyone because you've destroyed this level of protection that you used to have. So I mean, what kind of world will we live in, where the mighty just decides to invade the next country and so on and so forth? The final point I want to say, even the green fascist foreign minister of Germany, in response to Trump's treatment of Zelensky, said, what kind of world is this, where might makes right? This is absolutely unacceptable. Where is the rule of law? It's like, this woman is beyond delusional. I mean, what has your government been doing, supporting the genocide over this entire period, arming it, defending it, shielding it from accountability? Haven't you seen the might makes right that you created, especially Germany of all countries? So they don't see that. They have this disconnect from reality, European politicians, and we need to remind mainly the public. I mean, we speak to politicians, I couldn't care less to speak to them if they're immoral. I would speak to the public to pressure them. So it's always building power to pressure from the grassroots to the grass tops. It's not your ethical argument. You could be the best lawyer on earth. You cannot win without power.
Yeah, I think that, the past few weeks on the international stage has been very tumultuous and, shaking up and also unveiling what we know has always been on the base of these institutions. But I was thinking about the alliance then, the potential of alliances now, because during the past 2 years, or even since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the potential alliance between like a leftist or like a pro-Palestinian movement and like the struggle for Ukraine, for example, has felt almost impossible. And it is a thought that I have been having the past few weeks, like, is this now the time then? Because it's very apparent what we have also been saying from a sort of anti-imperialist standpoint, that Ukraine is a pawn for these big states. Then there is like a lot of other things to take into account that also has a lot to do with fascism. But I'm wondering, like, is this also, or is that also just a moral imperative, or like, if you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I can. I think this is, of course, a very hard thing to talk about. I mean, or to try to predict. For me, one of the hardest things that has been going on is, of course, that all talks of a free Palestine is always labeled as anti-Semitic, of course, and this is something that keeps, is brought up. It's a really something that really makes people simply all the time. I mean, makes these alliances and so on. Even though it's a lie, it's always something that brings up as a wall between these alliances. And I'm not. I think that for me, the BDS movement is something that others can join. That is the alliance that I would like to see. I'm not really, for me, I'm not interested in having, for example, another type. If you want to join the BDS movement, which I believe also, of course, could be applied to many other countries. That's what Stas Omar has been saying. It's, it came from South Africa. It can be also applied to other people or other countries that really, are committing war crimes and so on. So for me, perhaps I haven't been thinking about this very much. I have just thought that if because of the moral, high ground that I really is undeniable here, I believe that if you're someone fighting for freedom in Ukraine and you can't see that is intertwined with the Palestinian cause, then it's very hard for me to tell you,
Just, I agree, and just I wanted to add something. Those European leaders meeting in London and God knows where next, they mentioned something very interesting, a new concept for humanity. They said peace has to be with justice. Interesting notion for European leaders to discover this. I mean, it's very interesting. Christopher Columbus. So finally, the P and the J are connected when it comes to Ukraine. For Palestine, it's peace, no justice. Israel is powerful, you have to live with it, accept the bones they throw to you, and just live with it. For Africans asking for reparations, no, you won't get it. Slavery is nasty, but, life is tough. How else could we have built Stockholm, London, Paris, and, we needed that. So it's, it's for human advancement. So forget reparations, you've got to live with it, just accept the bones we give to some African dictators, and so on and so forth. So justice is such an anti-European establishment notion, but they've discovered it finally. So maybe we can use that. So you discovered a notion, how about being consistent? Another term that's like Arabic or Chinese to Europeans. Consistency. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I'm thinking now that we will also have some time for questions from the audience, and we still have half an hour. I'm looking for yes, so more than half an hour. So and I've seen people seeming urgent to comment and ask things, and I think that box is. It's a mic. So if just throw it.
It's not my invention, I swear.
Hands. If you yes.
Okay. First.
Please.
Speaking to us. No, you hold.
I have many questions. I'll start with one. You mentioned the word psychotic, and I'm thinking that the whole world is psychotic right now. So how do you reason with psychotic on ethics?
Are we taking a number of questions?
I think we can take another question at least. Maybe yes, the closest one here. Sorry.
Thank you. So on the topic of the intersectional aspect of the fight, and it's kind of related to what you said just now about the Ukrainian movement. As someone who studies at Malmö University, there is often a sense of hypocrisy between the Palestinian cause and the Ukrainian cause, where the Ukrainian cause is allowed a lot more liberty with, for example, the use of flags. And so is it not wise for the Palestinian movement then to try to ally itself with the Ukrainian movement to gain more legitimacy? For example, if we bring it to a wider state level, you said before that Sweden exports weapons to Israel, which, as you say, is against international law. It could be a very effective, popular move to instead be saying, well, instead of sending these weapons to an unethical fight, which we all agree is unethical, why not send it to Ukraine, which most Swedes agree is ethical? So the intersectional aspect where we unite the Palestinian cause with the Ukrainian one, that makes sense?
Just another one, if there's anyone in the vicinity. Yes, please. Throw it.
You guys already talked about it a little bit, but I think a phrase very common in leftist movements is that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. And I think a lot of people use it as an excuse to like not partake in the boycott or whatever. But I feel like it's way more complicated than that, because as you mentioned, Balsam, its language has power, and saying stuff like that is not always aligning with leftist values. So I just want to hear like your thoughts on it.
We can go.
Yeah, I can start. Thank you so much. Yes, I think what this is so funny with this mic. Once when I'm just a little thing. Once when I was on a stage in Malmö, I got a book in my face. So now I'm just afraid that I'm gonna get that in my face, but it's okay. It's after the talk. No, but I think there's something that Ustaz Omar said about the purity, right? We were speaking about, and who can afford that type of purity, and who can afford to say these kind of things. And I used to say, I've always, as someone who hasn't had much money with my parents coming here as immigrants and me myself coming here as an immigrant, I lived ethically regardless, right? Because I couldn't do anything else. So there's something about that, the choices that you try to make, and also the way that you're trying to sugarcoat the choices that you don't make. Now, if that is true, let us say that is true. What is so brilliant with the BDS movements is, of course, that so you want to leave the boycotts. This is a very important thing, but so what are you working towards with the divestments then? How are you working with the sanctions then? What are your, there's a lot of places where you can do this, but I think that you really should actually challenge these kind of notions, because it has to do with choice in the end, and we're not dealing with that. We're trying to deal with morality and not choice. I mean, there's a difference here. And of course, and still not going to purity. There is also, and I mean, Ustaz Omar really said it perfectly with the whole thing. If you don't have a choice, then there is something else. But yeah, I think those kind of, I'm older now, so I'm over with those. People used to say those things, and but we really got to stop. Even you younglings must stop with that.
I would just add to that those who hide behind "I'm waiting for world revolution" are those that do not plan to do anything useful in life. So they're not leftists. Because world revolution will never come from the sky. It's our human agency. And it starts with small acts, incremental acts. Even Che Guevara said it very clearly. You don't win in a revolution without incremental victories, building power here and there, and then you can win against a dictatorship, so anyone waiting for world revolution, and then I'll be ethical, so you just do not plan to do anything positive, and you don't believe in human agency, basically. You want something, divine intervention, to be useful. On the psychotic and the ethical question, I'm not sure I understand the question, and I'm not sure I understand the connection, but I think European leaders, for the most part, have reached a level of disconnect from reality. Maybe 500 years of colonialism goes into your cultural DNA. It becomes part of you, so you don't see yourself as hypocritical. You're not lying. You really believe you are the masters of the universe until you get Trump to show you your real place. I eat and you wash the dishes, as one neocon in the US said. The US eats and Europe does the dishes. Exactly. That's Europe's role. But European leaders are so delusional. They're still, the British, they think they're still leaders. In Britain, they still think they have the empire. Well, guess what? You don't. And even whatever you have now is disappearing. Soon enough, it'll be England alone. They still think, we have the empire, Egypt, India, the whole world. So I think it's very important to realize that this is, again, colonial heritage. It does that to you. It destroys us, the colonized, but it also does something really bad to the colonizers. They become full of something really bad. So, and I've said this before, as a male, I need to every day check my whether I'm sexist or not. Every day, my gender privilege, I have to check it. Even as a Palestinian who's oppressed and so, but I still have some relative privilege in a patriarchal society compared to women. So I have to check my privilege every day, or else, growing in a patriarchal society, you fall into patriarchy. Unless you reflect deeply every single day, it's normal to fall into a patriarchy. White people, if they don't check their racial privilege every day, they become racist. Culture, again, it's in the cultural DNA of the West to be racist. Unless they check their racial privilege every day, they fall into racism. How else could a country like Sweden, which was a model for many around the world as the country of the best welfare services and education and health and women's rights and maternity leave. The whole world talks about Swedish maternity leave being ridiculously long. I mean, the envy of the world. That was Sweden in our imagination 20, 30 years ago. How could this happen in this country where the Minister of Education gets to dictate to vice chancellors how to suppress Palestine advocacy? As research by WhatsApp, a group of scholars and students, has shown, how could Sweden reach this level of the decline of democracy, where the fascists call themselves Democrats? I mean, the irony of the world. But anyway, it's like Animal Farm. You know, they changed the meanings of the terms. So I think this is psychotic. This is delusion reaching a level of. So ethically, we have to question that. We have to investigate that, and we have to hold the mirror to show what this looks like to the people, not to those leaders, to the people. Those are your leaders. How could you elect those idiots as your leaders? No offense to idiots. On Ukraine and the hypocrisy and so on, I take a very different approach, because part of the problem that we were discussing before, it's not just the colonial heritage and 500 years and in the cultural DNA. Militarization is part of this. The decline of the West, the colonial West, is happening. I mean, this is obvious. And when empires start to decline, they become really ruthless and aggressive. Thus, Trump. Thus, Alternative for Deutschland. Thus, the fascists in Sweden and Italy and Netherlands and France. I mean, look, it's a phenomenon everywhere in Europe. 20 to 25% of Europeans support fascist parties. Imagine. And that's 20-25% of the public. If you look at the whites alone, it must be much higher. In a country like Germany, where people of color are millions, Turks, Syrians, and so on, it must be 30-some% of whites supporting fascist parties. So I wouldn't go for anything related to militarization. Militarization is horrible for humanity, period. We should end all arms trade, and people have to find solutions that do not include tanks and airplanes and missiles and all the stuff that most of budgets are going to, instead of health service and education and so on, including in this country. This massive militarization, and the crazy Germans want to spend 200 billion, the new incoming government, on weaponry, mostly going to American weapons companies. Like one member of the German parliament said, it's not our job to make America great again. And she's just so right. So I wouldn't go with any solution, solidarity or not, that involves sending weapons to any country. End the militarization of society, spend it on social services and education. That is the solution for many problems.
So we have some questions over here. You can take the box. I mean, it's soft, so
I was wondering, looking at past struggles, anti-colonial struggles were successful. For example, South Africa, Vietnam, Algeria, other places. What can we learn from them and apply to Palestine, or what's different in the case of Palestine? And one thing I think of is the lack of a united front against the Israeli colonial regime. They have succeeded in dividing Gaza and the West Bank. So, like many people talk about, maybe if they manage to get Omar Barghouti out of prison, maybe he can lead the United Front or something else. So that's my question, maybe Tom's question.
Yeah, please. So I am a person who likes to take action, and my question is kind of directed at that. After almost, I think maybe now it's 1.5 years of the genocide, and with everything that's happening in the West Bank, Israel isn't stopping its violence, and sometimes it feels like the world is like starting to not forget, but they're like, oh yeah, I feel like sometimes you get to a point where people are all like, okay, we've heard that, we want to move on. And I feel like one big issue we have in the Palestine movement is that we don't have the control of the media. Because I still think that a lot of people who are not involved, but they probably don't, they wouldn't approve of what Israel is doing. They don't see it for what's happening as it is. So my question is, what are your thoughts about that, and how can we as activists, especially in the BDS movement, try to get more power? Because that's what you said, we can't rely on politicians or corporations, they don't care, obviously. So we need to get more people into the movement, we need to make people realize that this is so important for everyone, because, I mean, evil doesn't stop, it will continue. You know, what's happening to Palestinians isn't happening to them because they're Palestinians. It will, like, as you said, it spreads, like fascism spreads. So I feel like one point we need to address when we talk to people who are not so involved in the Palestinian cause is to remind them that basically, like, it's about intersectionality, it's about all of us. As long as you're not part of the top 1%, you will be you'll be on the menu. So what are your thoughts about that, and what are ways you think we can address it as activists?
Maybe someone, yes. And maybe you can keep it up there, and hopefully other people don't have to.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful evening, and big thanks to BDS for organizing this. So I want to speak to you as a student that studies international law and human rights. Me and many other youth and students that I've met both within my own faculty, but also different universities in Sweden and around Europe, feel, I don't like the word hopelessness, but somewhere along that line, when it comes to international law in particular, and many have found difficulties in trying to find the right type of motivation or the right type of hope to hold on to, because, you know, we're studying one thing in the uni and then outside we're meeting a totally different reality. So I guess my question is, how do we navigate through this hypocrisy, both as students but also as civil private folks, but particularly as students?
Okay.
No, you must start.
On the first question about comparisons and contrasting Palestine with South Africa, Algeria, and so on, Vietnam, that the lack of a united front among Palestinians is certainly a missing ingredient. In all those struggles, there was a united front. And this is absolutely true. Palestinian disunity is certainly a huge weakness. A lot can be said how we can regain unity. In my personal view, again, not representing the BDS movement, my personal view is that the PLO the Palestine Liberation Organization needs to be reestablished from the bottom up. We cannot let go of it. We cannot dismiss it. It's our Palestinian heritage. It's our identity. Actually, my father was one of the founders of it, so I feel a personal connection to it. And it was formed the same year I was born, so another connection to it. But anyway, regardless of those connections, it's a Palestinian heritage that we cannot throw away. Despite the corruption, despite the fact that its leadership is unelected and totally corrupt and so on, it's ours. We need to get it back by building it from the grassroots up, the student unions, women's unions, professional syndicates, and so on, to retake it. And there we establish this unity from the bottom up. It will not be established at the top. It will not be. Because they're proxy forces, some serving US-Israeli interests, some serving European, and so on. It will not happen on top unless it's pushed from below. So we need a lot of Palestinian activism from below to take the initiative and re-establishing Palestinian unions. I mean, it's not something my grandmother or grandfather told me. I lived in that era where the General Union of Palestinian Students was extremely powerful and we had democratic elections, in fact. And there were so many factions and independents and real democratic elections, and it had power. We could criticize every single leader in the PLO. We did. I lived that era. That's all gone now. So we need to re-establish that, and it's not a romantic thing. It can happen, because that's how the PLO started. It started with small pockets that got together in Jerusalem, 1964, and then they established the PLO. But I agree with the analysis that it's a weakness. Of course, there are many differences between us and Vietnam and Algeria and South Africa, but there's no time to go into them now. Now, on the point that genocide is continuing, everything we've done has not stopped it completely. Israel's criminality in the West Bank continues. They're using some of the same tactics. So the media, we have almost no control over the media. So what can be done? There are several things that can be said, because the picture might look very gloomy if we look at it from one angle. If you step away from it, any painting, if you step away from it, you see much more in it than when you're too close to it. When you're too close, you see the details that are right in front of you. And sometimes as activists, we do this, we make this mistake. We take a snapshot of something as if this is the reality, when it's just a snapshot. If you look at the process, because a snapshot never shows the process. If you look at the process, the past, the potential future, where can we go with this? What dynamic power relations can happen that can change the course of act, and so on, it's a different picture. So what I meant to say is that if you look at not just the Gen Z, the younger generations around the world in general, from Japan to the US, from Sweden to South Africa, and everywhere in between, the younger generation is the most pro-Palestine around the world. We've never seen this type of generational difference in our history. And I'm old enough to remember, I've never seen this. It's younger people almost in every single country are much more progressive on Palestine than their parents, and forget their grandparents. They're much better than their grandparents, including Jewish students in the US that we are in touch with all the time. Sometimes I get some of those Jewish students who need advice. How do I deal with my grandparents on the Friday night family meal? I have no idea how you deal with it. I mean, I'm not a psychotherapist. I wish I were. You need Freud and maybe he won't succeed. But I have no idea. But one point is that this is happening across the world. Why? Because the younger generation do not watch CNN for news. They don't watch Swedish TV for news. They don't get their news from TV and the horribly corrupt newspapers. They don't. The corporate newspapers. They get it from social media, which is much more open, despite the tech companies being horribly repressive, racist, and colonial, but they still allow some space for oppressed communities to express. Many of your generation will have seen Palestinian influencers from Gaza telling them exactly how they feel, right? I mean, almost everyone knows Bisan, everyone knows, those names have become world-known names because that's where you get your news about Gaza. And you get it from Israeli criminals that are showing you how they're blowing up houses. No filters, right? Now, the older generation still watches the news on TV and still reads those newspapers, which are horribly corrupt. So I think there's a generational gap, which is important. So there's a real change happening. The leaders of the future are much more pro-Palestine. Israel knows this, and we know this. In 10, 20 years, Israel will no longer have a monopoly on this, the media, because the media is not just the media. It's not the New York Times and the CNNs. It's a lot more diverse. So that front is very important, and it gives us hope. Because I deal with BDS activists across the world, I can see how much change is happening. Just one example, I said this before. In 2023, October, we had 0 countries supporting a military embargo of Israel. Today, we have 53. 53 countries support a military embargo of Israel, including Norway, more or less. But the point is, there's a massive change happening, and we need to see that, because hopelessness is something, and this connects to the point about international law and hopelessness. Hopelessness is part of colonizing the minds. It's not a natural state of affair. It's not just a result of poverty, racism, and so on. I've seen people in the worst conditions of all kinds of oppression who have a lot of hope, who fought back. How do you think revolutions have succeeded against all odds? How did Rosa Parks challenge the Montgomery bus? And so on. And there's so many examples in history. So hope is not a romantic thing that, it's something that is part of our resistance. Because hopelessness is a colonial weapon. They drill into your head hopelessness so that you give up. You're a consumer, don't challenge the system. You just live with it. No, I won't accept the system. I'll fight back, but not alone. Because to be effective, you have to be collective. I will find a group that will grow and grow and grow, and we will challenge the system. And if a certain party does not deliver, we'll vote for another party. And when we have enough people power, the parties will listen, because elected officials do care to get elected, ultimately. If we can have enough power, we can affect that. So never give up. And this connects me to the final question, which is about international law. And there's a lot to be said, but the way international law is taught in many law schools, I'm an engineer, I'm not a lawyer, but I have enough experience to understand how it's taught from many brilliant legal minds. It is so conservative, and it's so colonial, and they teach it as if it's the Bible. It's faith. You accept it, those are the rules, and that's it. Never accept this reading of international law. There's the whole school called Third World Approaches to International Law. Very, very important, very critical readings of international law. And we, even in our own experience, we know we can expand the definitions of international law and apply them differently to isolate our enemies and to win our justice. It can be done, we're doing it. Never give up hope. And the last thing I want to say, there's a British writer whose name escapes me at this point, who said, if I have not done everything I could do against a system of oppression, then I cannot reach hopelessness, because I need to maintain the hope until I've exhausted everything possible that I can do. If you haven't, you can't stop now. If Palestinians in Gaza, despite this ongoing genocide, have never given up hope. You see them, like in Ramadan, having those iftar tables with almost nothing. Very little is coming into Gaza, but they never gave up hope. You don't get to give up hope.
Thank you so much, Ustaz Omar. I just want to add some things that I was thinking about. Like for the first question, of course, as a Kurdish person, and I have a lot to say about the Kurdish non-solidarity that's been going on the last 15 months that I'm really, well, in many ways, actually ashamed of. But as a Kurdish person who's always been, the Palestinian struggle has always been a very, very important one in my family. And of course, not having a state is something that I think Ustaz Omar was into, the difficulties of having a unity then when you don't have a state. Now, in the Kurdish, I mean, this is a whole other thing, but it's always been a problem in the when it comes to the question of Kurdistan, which is simply how can you unite this, and especially when it's over 4 nation states. That has been a very I think eventually what we have reached, of course, is the idea of federation. Yeah, having some sort of federation, simply not having a nation state, which for me, who hates the nation state, is a great thing. But I think this is like the whole division that's been going on. The whole, this makes it extremely hard. But what needs to be done exactly is what you are also speaking about, Omar, which is that all through, also with the Kurdish struggle, there has been very good examples of resistance, and these must be taken care of. These must be, you can't throw them out because we didn't reach whatever it was that, because here there lies something that is very, very important. And I was also wanting to say something, just a little bit about
I'm really sorry.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people have been telling me with their signs that we have to end
What?
this conversation now. They've been giving me signs. But what I want to say is that
I was thinking we were speaking like 2 more hours at least.
I know. No, but so really, even though we don't have the bouncy microphone, we can still keep talking. We will go outside and we can talk. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge. Omar Barghouti, thank you for coming to Malmö.
Yes.
All of you in the audience who have come, questions, thoughts, things. We will bring this with you. We will continue this dialogue. And very thankful to BDS for arranging this evening.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.